So, good evening, everybody. My dog and I say hello to you. We're really, really very lucky to have as a congregant Dr. Martin Schlesselberg, who is a pulmonary and critical care specialist. And Dr. Schlesselberg is going to talk to us about all these crazy infectious diseases that have either come as new things or as things that we thought we had eradicated. And so we don't want to waste any time with an introduction because he's got lots of stuff to tell us. So Dr. Schlesselberg, please begin.
Thank you so much. Let's see if this is going to work.
Okay, we're seeing your shared screen.
All right, so good evening, everybody. Very, very happy to be here. About 3 days ago, I had a talk on long COVID, and that's where I got this slide from. And then I found out that people wanted to hear about polio and monkeypox. So I took a look at this slide and I filled the bus on the bottom up with a lot of very overpriced gas and turned on the engine and moved it out of the way to make room for polio and monkeypox. All right, so here's a little bit about me. I'm an assistant clinical professor at the UCR School of Medicine. I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins. I did my residency there as well. I did my pulmonary fellowship over at UCSD Medical Center in San Diego with some very wonderful people. I'm a California licensed attorney. I was an AIDS researcher in the time, so that's why I have an interest in viral illnesses in general, and particularly viral pneumonias, and I'm also a qualified medical examiner. So I'm giving you this website. It is the official CDC website. It has useful information on the nature and risks of the virus, its prevention and treatment, and the development, safety, and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. And I'm going to direct you to this website for any questions regarding any of those three issues. All right, let's get a little perspective on this. It's very interesting when you go through history. Back in the day when they had bubonic plague, you remember that, right? This particular illness killed 50% of the population in Europe, and it took 200 years for the population to recover. And then smallpox, a little more recently, was a gift to the American Indians and killed off 90% of them, shifting the balance of power in North America, something I did not realize. And then the Spanish flu, which I've talked about during the last lecture, is 100 years old. More people died from the flu than died from the war. And down here, I hope you can see my mouse, the HIV easily outranks COVID-19 so far in terms of number of deaths. And here, number 7 is little COVID-19, still growing, but again, in historical perspective, not the worst thing the world's seen. Okay, well, we are now going to learn about poliomyelitis, something we thought we'd never have to learn about. But as you see, I've called this vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, and I'm going to explain why in a short while. Why do we call it that? So let's talk a little bit about this. Here is an Egyptian painting where you can see a shriveled leg here, and it's felt this shows that polio was present long before recorded history. These paintings depict otherwise healthy people with withered limbs or young children walking with canes. And then what is poliomyelitis? So poliomyelitis is a highly infectious viral disease, mainly affects young children. It is transmitted through contaminated food and water. It multiplies in the small intestine and from there invades the nervous system. And that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt visiting a bunch of kids who are crippled from this disease. Now, paralysis only occurs in 0.1%, that's 1 in 1,000 to 1% or 1 in 100 of those who become infected. And paralysis of the respiratory muscles or from cardiac arrest happens if the neurons destroy nerves in the medulla oblongata. Patients have some or full recovery from paralysis, usually within 6 months, and physical therapy is recommended for full recovery. If you've been on this earth long enough, you probably know some people who have had polio. That's what it looks like under the electron microscope. It's transmitted through both oral and fecal routes. Implantation and replication occur in the oropharynx or intestinal mucosa, and clinical symptoms appear 7 to 10 days after infection. All righty, so here is the business end of it. Spinal polio occurs when the virus invades the motor neurons of the anterior horn cell or the central gray matter. That's the little red thing here and the gray stuff in the middle. And these neurons control movement of muscle in the trunk, limbs, and intercostal muscles. It causes inflammation of the nerve cells and leads to damage or destruction of the motoneuron ganglia. Now, a smaller number of people have bulbar palsy. It's about 2% of all cases, so very small amount. But when it does occur, it destroys nerves within the bulbar region of the brain. That's where most of the cranial nerves come out. And you have all of these symptoms here: difficulty swallowing, chewing, nasal regurgitation, handling secretions, and you can read the rest of the list. You can imagine this is a much more awful illness to deal with because of the location. All righty, so how does it present? Just like a regular virus illness with a couple of extras: fever, fatigue, headache, vomiting, but also neck stiffness and pain in the limbs, and a small number of cases progress to paralysis. And here's an iron lung. I don't think we use those anymore, but you can also see the insignia of the March of Dimes on the side, and the nurse taking care of this very, very young patient. There is no cure for polio, and that's why it's so very, very important to discuss it today. Current treatment is supportive, and paralytic polio requires long-term rehabilitation, physical therapy, corrective shoes, orthopedic surgery, and ventilatory support. It's a disease with long-term consequences. Much of what we're going to be talking about with long COVID is a disease with long-term consequences. All righty, a tale of two vaccines. We're getting closer to explaining why we call this vaccine-derived poliomyelitis. So Jonas Salk was a great hero of the United States. It's a great story. He cultured poliovirus in monkey kidneys. He then activated it with formaldehyde. So this is an inactivated virus. It does not grow. And before releasing it to the public, he tested the vaccine on his own family and himself. He never patented the vaccine. In 1954, 2 million children were enrolled in a clinical trial. Half got the vaccine, half the placebo. It was an amazing success. FDR, who is felt to have also had polio, himself promoted the vaccine. Those tale of two vaccines have to have two vaccine makers, and this is Albert Saban. You may have heard of the Saban and Salk vaccines. He discovered that poliovirus lived and multiplied in the small intestine. That's where your food is processed. And he thought, an oral vaccine might prevent the virus from entering the bloodstream. So think about it this way. You get it from the oral route. It's growing in the gut. It has to escape from the gut, go through the circulation, and enter the nervous system. If you can hit it at its source and hit it hard, you might be able to prevent it. And that's exactly what it does. So it's made by growing the virus in non-human cells and causing them to mutate into non-infectious attenuated virus. In order to test this in the day, they paid inmates at a federal prison $25 to take the vaccine and gave them 3 days off of their prison sentence. They all developed antibodies to infection. He then tested it in Russia and Eastern Europe. But why not the US? The US actually outlawed them from testing the vaccine in the United States. They felt that the problem with giving people a mutated vaccine is that it could mutate back to an infectious virus. In any event, in 1963, Saban's vaccine was outlawed in the United States. Very interesting history, very interesting times. So, and this is, I guess, what I've already said, that it grows in the small intestine. The immune system actually makes special antibodies that prevent spread into the blood. And just like wild paralytic polio, a person vaccinated with the oral Saban vaccine can spread the attenuated vaccine to a non-vaccinated person in the same way the wild virus is spread. So let's think about this a little. You got to kind of twist your head around this. You give a child the vaccine. The vaccine is alive. It's growing in his gut. Through either the fecal or the oral route, the child's around other children who haven't gotten the vaccine. They get infected with this same virus and achieve immunity. Okay, so Dr. Saban felt that that was a very good strategy to try to spread this throughout the population. So this works very well if the majority of the population is vaccinated. But what happens if most of the population is not vaccinated? What could go wrong? Can you think of it? Have you thought of it yet? All righty. So here is an article. And just so you know, all of my slides are going to show you the source. So this is on the CDC website. It's from the Emerging Infectious Diseases article. Here's your date. Most of them will have a date. And the reason why I have it is that most of the articles I'm going to show you on long COVID, they're just a few months old. I mean, we're talking April, June, July, and then August, and that's it for most of the slides. So this is a little bit older, of course. And in June 2013, in a letter to the editor, a group of scientists reported 3 children who had developed paralytic polio as a result of mutated, attenuated live virus. Talk about a good strategy backfiring. That's it. The attenuated live virus spreads throughout the population, and due to a lack of immunity, the virus is allowed to mutate. When the virus mutates into a pathogenic agent, paralytic polio emerges into the population. And here's a quote from the article. I'll just read it. Low polio vaccine coverage frequently enables the emergence of vaccine-derived polioviruses or the reintroduction of wild-type poliovirus from disease-endemic countries, and both scenarios threaten the success of poliomyelitis eradication program. Guess what? We're living through that right now, today, here and now, okay? So in July of 2022, CDC was notified of a case of polio caused by vaccine-derived poliovirus type 2, there's 3 types, in an unvaccinated individual from Rockland County, New York. 3 cases of disease caused by vaccine-derived polioviruses have been identified in the United States since the year 2000. In 2005, it was found in Minnesota. In 2008, an adult developed paralytic polio. And in 2013, there was a fatal case in an infant. Wow, did you know that? I didn't until I did this talk. That's pretty impressive. So here's an article from Britain. They always have really fancy headlines. I love to use them. Over the past 4 months, poliovirus has been detected 116 times in 19 sewage samples. The UK is now in a race to vaccinate the entire population with the inactivated polio vaccine. That's the Salk vaccine we talked about. And the virus is being detected as vaccine-derived poliovirus from the oral vaccine. Wow. Think about that, folks. Wow. And here is from New York. They reported the first US polio case in almost a decade. In Rockland County, they only have a 60% vaccination rate. And the virus strain was identical to those down in London and Jerusalem. Yes, this is a worldwide problem, not just here. And I think a lot of this is the same stuff we've already talked about. Okay, so before I move on, I have to tell you something. If you're not sure that you're vaccinated for a polio virus, you don't have a good history, maybe something happened while you were getting your 3 shots, it'd be a good time to get vaccinated. And with the inactivated vaccine, yes, okay? Now, the next thing I was asked to talk about was monkeypox. Beautiful, beautiful organism, as you can see from this lovely picture. All righty, so daily news. Health official investigating possible monkeypox case in New York City. Well, guess what? It was real. So they isolated the guy in Bellevue Hospital, and that's what it was. And then you have an article from July 25th, 2022. The World Health Organization chief said monkeypox is a global emergency. And you know what? Honest to God, it is. It is a global emergency. It's amazing. So here's what these little guys look like under the electron microscope. Maybe you have one at home. You can take a look at it. And here's what it looks demographically in the United States. And so New York, Florida, Illinois, Texas, and California have the predominant number of organisms, but cases, but you can see it's all over the place. Wow. Okay, so it's a rare, sometimes life-threatening zoonotic infection. You'll remember zoonotic means it comes from an animal, like a bat or a civet or even a camel, if you remember the first lecture. It's endemic in West and Central Africa. It's caused by the monkeypox virus. I think you already knew that. And specific animal reservoir is unknown, but likely small mammals. It can spread from infected animals to humans and person to person with respiratory secretions, skin to skin, and fomites. I think I'm going to repeat that later on if I'm not mistaken. All these slides are just like 2 days or less than 2 days old, okay? So how can you catch it? You can catch it from an infected animal. Anybody working around infected animals? Probably not. Eating meat from an infected animal? So probably not. Otherwise, okay, touching clothing, bedding, or towels used by someone with the monkeypox rash? Check. Touching monkeypox skin blisters or scabs? Check. Or the coughs and sneezes of a person with monkeypox rash? Check. All right. So it spreads in a few ways. And I think you get the idea, close or intimate contact with somebody who has this disease, including, according to this, contact with respiratory secretions, and then also intimate contact as well. So I found this article from NBC News, and initially I was intrigued by it, and then I got a little bit disgusted with it. So I want to share with you why. So this first page just talks about its discussion of an article, which I'm going to show you. But they basically said the disease is chiefly transmitted by sex with men, citing an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. And these researchers pulled data on 528 cases of monkeypox that were diagnosed between a couple of months at a bunch of sites in 16 countries. And they found that all the cases were among men, including one transgender man, 98% of whom identified as gay or bisexual. You can read the rest of it, but basically at the bottom, the authors reported that 5% of the cases were likely transmitted through sexual close contact. Well, so far so good. That's what the article said, and that's what the NBC News reported. But then they went on to, I don't know, expand on that, okay? And so they wrote that these data point clearly to the fact that infections are so far almost exclusively occurring among men who have sex with men. Exclusively. Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. They also go on to say that public health experts theorize that major LGBTQ pride gatherings in June may have facilitated transmission of the virus. So I guess if you didn't attend one of those gatherings, you're probably okay, right? And then the bottom one, the finding that 95% of cases may have been transmitted during sex provides reassurance that this outbreak is primarily caused by very close contact and may explain why it's been largely limited so far to dense social networks of men who have sex with men. And that's from a respected source. But you know what? I want to let you know, 95% means that 5% are left. That's 1 out of 20. How many people do you pass in a given day, okay? In any event, here's the actual article that is a graphic. And again, you're going to see the name of the journal, the date, so you see it's brand new stuff, and the titles, just so you know, you'll see that over and over again during this talk. Here's a table from it. And here's what was actually said, that the suspected means of monkeypox virus transmission was sexual close contact in 95%. But then they say this, although the current outbreak is disproportionately affecting gay or bisexual men and other men who have sex with men, monkeypox is no more a gay disease than it is an African disease. It can affect anyone. And those words will show to you are prophetic. We identified 9 heterosexual men with monkeypox, not mentioned in the NBC article. And we urge vigilance when examining unusual acute rashes in any person. And I agree with that statement. So here we go, folks. Here's the future in a slide that's not really showing up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so 2 children in the US diagnosed with monkeypox in July 25th. One case is a toddler who's a resident of California. They're an infant visiting Washington, D.C., and they're being treated with an antiviral medication. And they said with children, transmission could occur with holding, cuddling, feeding, as well as through shared items such as towels, bedding, cups, and utensils. That's very interesting. So if you think about it, if you get a bunch of infected kids and it's not recognized right away, with the way that very, very young kids play, this could spread like wildfire through the pediatric population. And here is an article Oh, by the way, from today, just so you know, you're getting up-to-date information. And this is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, 3 more cases in children and a more updated map of the US showing, I think now that Georgia has joined the states which are reporting a lot of cases. This is a health emergency and it's worth noting and worth being aware of it, okay? So why is monkeypox given that name? Why did that happen? So in 1958, when it was first identified, there were 2 outbreaks of disease in monkeys that were kept for research, and the disease was pox-like, and therefore the name. And this goes through all the pre-US cases. I'm not going to spend time on this. And then these are the classic lesions. I have some very pretty pictures for you. You can imagine these are also very painful, okay? And again, more history, which I'm going to gloss over. Symptoms, I think you can guess it: skin rash, lesions in different phases of development, not too pleasant a disease, okay? And some more pictures for those of you who missed the others. All right, so CDC guidance to clinician is to perform thorough skin and mucosal exams, obtain swabs if you see it, and a diagnosis of, I think that sexually transmitted illness does not rule out co-infection with monkeypox. They just reported a case today of monkeypox, HIV, and COVID in one person. So CDC had it right on there. And any person, irrespective of gender, identity, or sexual orientation, can acquire and spread monkeypox. Absolutely true. Very little about treatment because I don't think we need to talk too much about it, but the Jenios, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, that's the vaccine mainly used right now. And it is being offered to people who are at risk. And there are some treatments. I've never used any of these agents except for maybe immune globulin. And so the Jenios is a live virus vaccine, as is the ACAM 2000. Oh yeah, and then we get to long COVID, something near and dear to my heart. As I said, this was initially just a long COVID talk and evolved into something a little bit more, but actually so necessary, right? Don't you think? We are actually living through a time of contagion that I've never, ever remembered. And of course, our fathers, mothers, grandparents, whatever, had to deal a lot more with infectious diseases. We were allowed to kind of forget about it for a while. And I will say that all of these new virus diseases are due to mutations. So get used to it. All right, long COVID. Okay, I know a little bit about this because I see patients like this all the time. And so I'm very happy about this part of the talk because I probably know the most about it. All righty, so introduction. It is a newly recognized syndrome affecting millions of people. That should read hundreds of millions of people. Most of the information presented in this talk is cutting edge, a few months old. For this reason, the information discussed will be from the original papers. And the journal and title will be usually found in the top upper right-hand corner. And a graph or table from the article will be posted on the side, just so you can see the kind of graphic information that appears. Sometimes it'll be a table, sometimes a drawing, sometimes some pretty cool graphics. I kind of like those. And the summary points in brown, that's the stuff that I write, folks, and I'll be going over those with you. All righty. So I can't even read what I wrote here, but basically, as you can see, all of a sudden it hit the newspapers and everybody's talking about long COVID. Now, why did it take so long to recognize? Well, you might remember the drama associated with the COVID virus when it first came in. Everybody's worried about getting sick and dying, hospitals overcrowding. They sent boats to New York, I think 2, and just kind of overwhelming for everybody. But this was going on all the time and people didn't even really know it. So how do you think they figured this out? Well, I'm going to tell you something that's kind of cool. All righty, so here is the paper in Science, Rapid Implementation of Mobile Technology for Real-Time Epidemiology of COVID-19. That's a lot of words, but I can sum it up like this. There is an app for that, okay? So in US, UK, and Sweden, 4 million people downloaded this app and entered their symptoms. And what they found out was that a large number of them had symptoms that long outlasted the acute illness. But isn't that kind of cool? All righty. So I just want to remind you before we go on that COVID can affect the whole body, all over the place, everything. These are all the syndromes associated with acute COVID illness. Now, we're going to be talking about long COVID, but I just want to make sure you understand it can go anywhere, okay? So I'm going to start with a story. This is a patient of mine. Her name is not Jane, but it's a real story. She's a mother, also a teacher, taught at home, stayed at home, and homeschooled 2 kids. And after 2 years of being cooped up like that, was stressed out. You can understand that, right? It's not an unusual tale. And so they felt cooped up and they had to get out, and she wanted to get out and explore the world. And so I like this one because it shows someone with a hazmat suit carefully getting out of their manhole or woman hole, whatever you like to call it. That actually didn't sound that good. Oh, well. All right. So she saw this beautiful poster from the governor of New York and thought that might be a good idea to visit her friends and family and enjoy the city. And while she was there, she took a plane. That's how she got there. She went to a Billy Joel concert. Now watch Billy Joel here. He changes. Do you see that? There's a reason for that, folks. I'm going to show you the most important chart on my first lecture and also on this lecture. And this is the risk chart, okay? Did she do something that was risky, okay? Well, in New York, everybody was masked. Everybody was 6 feet apart. They were very strict. So let's analyze it. Let's use the chart. So let's go here. Okay, she was in a high occupancy. Okay, so that puts her on that part of the chart. She was wearing face coverings, but had contact for a long time. Anytime it's more than 15 minutes, that's considered a long time in COVID time. And the place was poorly ventilated. So where does that put us on the chart? High risk activity, okay? So anytime you want to plan an event or whatever, this is a very, very important graph. And if anyone wants it, I'm happy to share it. For me, the risk-benefit analysis is so very important because we're going to be living with this illness for a very, very long time. And it's, of course, very nice to have government mandates telling you what to do, but it's also nice to be able to figure it out for yourself. And you might guess that I'm a big proponent of people figuring things out for themselves. And that's kind of been my approach to COVID with my patients and family and loved ones. All right, then she came back to Los Angeles. The air quality here looks a little bit better than what I'm used to seeing, but so be it. And before long, she became sick for a long time, couple of months. That's right. Every day was a sick day. It was really hard on her. And before long, she was also stressed out all over again for a whole different reason. And she couldn't cope anymore and called my office and said, guess what, Dr. Schlusselberg? I have these symptoms and they're not going away. So I explained to her, what are your symptoms? Well, she had shortness of breath, headache. She couldn't sleep at night. She was dizzy all the time, had brain fog. She had lost her sense of taste and smell, had difficulties in concentrating, difficulties in thinking. She was very, very, very depressed. I mean, like really depressed. She had fatigue all the time. She'd wake up in the morning and couldn't get herself to do anything, along with the depression where she was anxious and her hair was falling out of her head. Not very, very cool. She thought, like a lot of people, that if you get COVID, you'll recover in 1 or 2 weeks without needing medical treatment. But of course, as you can see from this slide, there's a whole lot of people there that didn't have that experience and were, I don't know if they're being ignored. We're not being noticed, I'll use that word, by the medical community, the media, and pretty much everybody else. But guess what? It's a major public health problem. It has humongous effects on the workforce, and people who suffer with this are really, really suffering. And she felt isolated in the world of COVID, and who could blame her, right? Not a lot of advice coming out, and you saw the research articles. they were all recent. So let's see what's going on here. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to find research on it is because they just recently defined what the heck it is. So is long COVID being sick for a month, 2 months, whatever? There's a chance that if you have one study looking at after 1 month, one study after 3 months, one after 6 months, you're all studying different things and you can come to different conclusions and no one's ever going to reach a consensus. Do you understand that? So the World Health Organization came up with this definition. If you have a history of probable or confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection, well, everybody can test themselves now, so that's kind of cool. And they say usually 3 months from the onset of COVID-19, that's a long time, right? And lasts for at least 2 months. So I don't know, maybe someone can help with this definition, but it looks to me like you have to wait 5 months after your initial diagnosis to be diagnosed with this. But we can all agree that anyone who's been sick that long after the acute illness probably has long COVID. And so people are now studying those people to the exclusion of everybody else. And again, the purpose of this stringent definition is to allow research to identify a specific group of patients that have a syndrome distinct from the acute illness. All righty, look at that publication date, folks. April 2022, the records of 1.5 million patients with COVID-19 were reviewed. 1/3 had persistent symptoms after 3 months. Women were more likely to report long COVID symptoms than men. I'm not sure that means more women had it. Okay, that may be a different phenomenon, but that's what they reported. And they said pre-existing asthma was a predisposing factor for lingering symptoms. They really didn't look at too many predisposing factors in the article, so I'd take that with a grain of salt. They recommended continued research. They estimated, yeah, walk away with this number, folks, 200 million individuals affected, okay? You walk around tomorrow and think about that and think about how much people talk about this disease. They're not talking about a 200 million worth, okay? And the post-COVID-19 conditions impact on population health and the labor force is enormous. That's absolutely true. I see people like that all the time. And when they have it, yeah, that really impacts their life. It impacts the workforce. It hits people in the prime of life when they can give the most to others. So it's imperative that those affected are provided proper health, social, and economic protections. I agree. Oh, this is a nice slide. Look at that. So we're going to talk about risk factors, okay? And of course, there's more articles looking at this specific question. Who's at risk, right? Who's going to get this, okay? So this is from Cell, okay? And it's from this year, March 3rd of 2022. They looked at 209 people, age 18 to 89, who had SARS-CoV-2 infection. Half of them reported fatigue. 1/4 of them had cough, and 18% had loss of smell or taste. And here's the risk factors they identified. Type 2 diabetes, a common illness. High viral load. Now, what does that mean? So what that means, if you measure the amount of RNA in their nares, comes out to be very high. Okay, so the body's producing many virus, multiplying multiple times. Okay. Reactivated Epstein-Barr virus in their blood. You may have heard that some diseases associated with fatigue are associated with Epstein-Barr virus. Well, it's controversial, but if that's true, guess what? If you weaken the immune system and reactivate that, maybe that's why so many people are fatigued. And then autoantibodies, which are antibodies against the cell. All righty, let's go to the next slide. Yes. What about people who are fully vaccinated? Okay. We're all told if you get fully vaccinated, you can go on with a normal life. Is it true? Is it? Well, these scientists studied 33,000, almost 34,000 veterans with breakthrough infections. And the breakthrough infection is defined as an infection that occurs in someone who's fully vaccinated. At 6 months after infection, people with breakthrough infection exhibited a higher risk of death, and then incident post-acute sequelae, cardiovascular, coagulation, hematologic, gastrointestinal, kidney, mental health. You get the picture, a whole bunch of things. Now, the risk was even higher in non-vaccinated patients, but what it says is that If you have been fully vaccinated and you are lucky enough to get COVID, you're at higher risk than someone who does not get any COVID whatsoever. All right, let's move on. Okay, now June 17th, 2022, studied 38,000, I think it's the same set of people with reinfection. So what is a reinfection? You get COVID once, you get COVID twice, that's a reinfection. Reinfection contributes additional risks of all cause, mortality, hospitalization, adverse health outcomes in the pulmonary and several extrapulmonary organ systems, the heart, clotting, diabetes, fatigue, gastrointestinal disorders, the whole slew. Risks were evident in those who were unvaccinated, had one shot or two or more shots prior to the second infection. Reinfection adds non-trivial risks of all-cause mortality, hospitalization, and adverse health outcomes in the acute and post-acute phase of the infections. So folks, wake up. Don't do risky behaviors. If you can, and I'll be happy to share it, get that graph that shows you your relative risks, study it, learn it, and live it, okay? Because it's not going away, it's evolving, and we have to evolve with it. Right now, people are out there doing whatever they want to do, and they are getting sick. How do I know that? Well, I work around a lot of those people that are getting sick. Not too long ago, I was sitting at a desk minding my own business, and one of the doctors who identifies as a friend sat right next to me, and he was clearing his throat. So I asked him, you okay? He said, oh, I just got something caught in my throat. So I said, okay, I mean, the doctor, right? The next day I got a call from him and told me that he tested positive for COVID. So that was an interesting day in my life. Okay, symptoms. Yeah, there are a lot of them, right? We're going to just focus on the big ones. This is long COVID, folks. All righty, so in this journal, MedRVIX, it's very recent. They looked at the relative contribution of the highest ranked symptoms. This is a beautiful graph, but I want you to see there's overlap. See that? That's important. So it's not really three very distinct symptoms, but they tried as best to say, well, how can we, categorize? And so they came up with three. There it is, from July of 2022, neurological symptoms, respiratory symptoms, and pretty much everything else, okay? So again, there can be a mixture, and of course I see that all the time, but this is the thinking that goes in to categorizing diseases and making sense of things like this. Chronic fatigue syndrome. All righty, so if you've ever had a viral illness, you kind of know what it feels like. You just have no energy, you can't do anything, and you have no get up and go. Well, a lot of these people with long COVID have this, but it never goes away. All righty, so this is from infectious disease, and a majority of long COVID symptoms have chronic fatigue, but here's something very important to take away. It's not unique to COVID. It's not. Several post-viral infections are associated with long-term fatigue, Epstein-Barr virus, Q fever, influenza, and other coronaviruses. And they suggested three different mechanisms: damage to the immune system, damage to the nervous system, and disruption of cellular metabolism. And I will let you know that influenza has associated with it a chronic fatigue syndrome. I didn't know that. Okay, so next one is brain fog. Okay. And here's a lead article in it, and they studied the fluid around the brain and found there were inflammatory markers and evidence of vascular injury. SARS-CoV-2 does enter the brain and causes inflammation. Here are your risk factors. One of them is familiar diabetes, and this is associated with anxiety and depression, history of alcohol stimulant abuse, learning disabilities. These people are very, very impaired. They have problems solving problems, remembering names, or it may take them 20, 30 minutes to get the words together to say what they want to say. And if you're in certain occupations, you can imagine it completely disables you from participating, right? All righty, we'll move on to breathlessness, that feeling that you can't get enough air. I think this particular person probably went a little too far. All righty, and I can't read what I wrote because I have this thing blocking it. God bless it. But anyway, this is a very, very fancy imaging, which shows someone whose lungs look completely normal are actually very abnormal if you test it with certain radioactive gases. And here's something that I don't see used that often, but it's very instructive. A lot of these people have small airways disease, which is not necessarily detected on spirometry, and you can't see it necessarily on an X-ray. But if you put them into a CT scan, have them take a deep breath as much as you can, and then let it out as much as you can identify areas of lung that don't compress, and that is small airways disease. In other words, the air stays in there. Those are parts of the lung that are not participating in gas exchange because the air is not moving. All righty, but what about patients who have breathlessness and perfectly normal heart and lungs? In other words, the last two things don't apply. Lungs are normal for the fancy radioactive xenon test, and they were normal for the breathing in and out test. What about those people? Well, let me backtrack just a little. So if the heart and lungs are normal, all you're left with are the cells, specifically the muscle cells, right? And so this fancy looking little guy here is called a mitochondria, and that's the engine of your cells. That's where the energy comes from. So you can imagine if something affects the mitochondria in the cells, and don't forget that these viruses, where do they replicate? They're in the cells. Well, what are their neighbors? Mitochondria. These doctors did something amazing, and it's going to be hard for me to explain to you. So I'm just going to kind of give you an idea. They measured the amount of oxygen extracted from the blood in people who were normal and had long COVID. And what they found was that the cells in the body were not able to extract as much blood for a given workload as people who were normal. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about it. You have oxygenated blood that goes to your cell. They're bathed in it. They use up as much oxygen as they can, right? That's how you get energy. But if they can't do that, what's going to happen? Well, the unused oxygen is going to come back to the heart. And if you can measure that, then you've identified something very interesting. The problem's not in the heart, it's not in the lungs, but it's in the cells themselves. That's amazing, okay? And this is, for someone like me, because I'm in the field, very impressive research. Unfortunately, if I have a patient, this is not the kind of test I would ordinarily order on them. It's an invasive test, and it actually involves quite a bit of work. Okay, so anosmia means you can't smell. So I found an animal that would have a great deal of problems if they had anosmia, right? This is an actual picture. It's not doctored whatsoever. And this is how you smell. So you have cheese in front of you. The molecules from the cheese go up your nose, and look over here. In your nose are these little olfactory receptors that go through the bone, see that? Into the brain, to a part of the brain called the olfactory bulb. That thing figures out what's going on over here and then relays it so you can actually have a sense of smell. Notice also that the cheese goes around the tongue. I don't want to miss that. Part of your sense of smell is the tongue, tasting it, okay? So this is an amazing, amazing MRI, and I'll explain it to you. So these are this little guy hanging down there, all the olfactory bulbs. The neurons are in the very center. Inflammation is white, see the white? But it's only the surrounding cells that have the inflammation. The neurons are spared. And so the authors of this article hypothesized that if you get better, you can have full restoration of smell. That's hope for a lot of people. All right, I'm going to go through another very unusual symptom. It's called POTS. I was sitting in my office one day. I had an appointment with a 35-year-old teacher who was being evaluated for long COVID. She was a competitive tennis pro in her youth and also a school teacher. She got a mild case of COVID from the school, but could not return to playing tennis. And gradually she developed symptoms of dizziness and fatigue, which were progressive. She tried to get back in shape, but her heart was racing. The doctors thought she had myocarditis, that's an inflammation of the heart. but they were wrong. And all the tests prove it. Every single test on the heart was completely normal. Every single test on the lung was completely normal. Finally, she was seen at a tertiary care center, that's like a university center, and was diagnosed with POTS due to COVID-19. When the table tilted from flat up to 30 degrees, her heart rate increased from 80 to 140. Now I want you to think about that. You're lying flat, they tilt you up 30 degrees, that's not a lot, and your heart rate goes up almost twice. How would that feel, right? So she's unable to work and must spend all of her time in the supine position, hasn't played tennis or taught school since her illness, severely disabled from this disease. And this is a picture of a tilt table. Not many places do this. This is from Hopkins. And here's the concept. I'm not going to spend too much more time on it, but here's the patient sitting down, and the blood has enough pressure to go up to about here. They stand up and now they're dizzy because they're not getting any circulation up here. And it's all dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. The heart and lungs are completely normal, completely normal. That is part of the syndrome. Okay, hair loss and more. Well, I'm going to tell you, I promised I would tell you things that you did not know from the news. And maybe it's in the news, I don't know, but I didn't know some of this stuff, so I imagine some of you might not either. A more recent article was published in July. It used the WHO definition, World Health Organization definition for post-acute SARS-CoV-2 syndrome. That's what we showed before, and they came up with some startling findings, okay? Drum roll, please, right? No. So they look at the electronic health records of 2.4 million UK residents. I want you to think about what these people, 2.4 million records. Wow. 12 weeks after their initial infection, they found 62 symptoms, only 20 of which were included in the World Health Organization's clinical case definition for long COVID. So this is new information, right? It's not published by the World Health Organization, which is an authority on it. And what did they find? The new symptoms included hair loss, impotence, reduced libido and sneezing, as well as amnesia, inability to perform familiar movements, bowel incontinence, hallucinations, and limb swelling. And by the way, look at the date on this. All recent articles, you're getting everything brand new, cutting edge in this lecture. All right, so specific people were at risk, and here's the list, a little bit more authoritative because they use the WHO definition. Females, younger people, ethnic minorities, poorer people, smokers, people who are overweight, people with chronic health problems. And they, again, identified the same symptom clusters. 80% had a broad range of symptoms ranging from fatigue to headache to pain. 15% were class 3, mental health problems, cognitive symptoms, and class 2, only 1 out of 20 had mainly respiratory symptoms. And there, this is from the article, I didn't do this. The word clouds for each of those symptom meshes. And the way a word cloud works is the larger the word, the more times it appears in a document. In this case, it should be taken to mean that it's more common, and the smaller, the less common, okay? We're almost done, folks, and I'm on time, which is kind of cool. Clues to long COVID. What do the researchers say? Well, let's see. So you may be aware that COVID-19 causes clots in the body. That's why we tend to use anticoagulants on certain subgroup of patients in the hospital. They can get heart attack, they can get strokes, they can get peripheral clots all over. So in Italy, doctors are using a sophisticated imaging technique to analyze poor blood flow in the lungs. And in long COVID patients, and instead of seeing bright orange, please remember the orange color, because we're going to see a slide shortly, and yellows, which mean pulsing blood. So orange and yellow, pulsing blood, lungs are blue, non-pulsing blood, blood's not moving. Well, if blood's not moving, what does that mean? It means something's blocking it. If you can't see it on a CT angiogram, whatever, well, they're not large clots. If they're not large clots, they're tiny clots. See where this is going? And here's a study, and a pretty severe one. You see parts where the lungs are orange. You see all that? But in most cases, you see blue, okay? And these are people with normal appearing lungs, CT scans normal. Obviously their lungs are not normal at all. Let's move on. Little transition here, persistent virus. Well, what if the virus infects your body and your immune system gets rid of it, but not all of it? Maybe it hides in the body where it's hard for the immune cells to find it. And then every once in a while it comes out to say, hello. Could it be doing that? You know, it's not unknown. Herpes Zoster or the shingles virus hides out in your nerves, as does herpes, right? And ever get a cold sore? Well, you probably didn't acquire that virus. It's probably with you every single day of the week. And of course, people who are very ill in the hospital or under a lot of stress can get cold sores, and also HIV can evade the immune system, okay? It's too early, more research to come. I'm sure there'll be more in the coming months. Very exciting. And here are some of those very viruses that I just spoke of. And then finally, the immune system. Researchers in Australia have shown that patients with long COVID have an immune system on high alert. Could the virus disrupt the normal workings of the immune system? Well, that's interesting, right? Could the symptoms be a product of an immune system gone haywire? That's going to require a lot of research. There's a lot of working parts in the immune system, and not all of it's completely understood, and it's very, very complicated. So look out for that. And then autoimmune diseases. There are all kinds of diseases, and you probably know people who have some of these diseases. They're not unusual or uncommon. Could the virus make your immune system go crazy and maybe make the body attack itself? If I remember correctly, when they studied the cerebral spinal fluid, they did find inflammatory markers. Okay, so there's ongoing research about long COVID. This study of Recover is done at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. And if you wish to volunteer, here's the website. This one's done at UCLA. Now, in this case, you can make some money, okay? People who join can earn up to $100 by just completing surveys. So there's the site, but here you might want to you can email them and get more information. And this is ongoing research. It's an 18-month study. Oh, we're not done, folks. I thought we were done, but I forgot treatment. Now, why did I use this slide? Well, maybe that's the state of treatment now. I don't know. You be the judge, but I thought this slide was appropriate. So Yale University has a pathway they want their physicians to take when they see people with COVID. Just wanted to share with you that there's a lot of work going on to try to systematize the treatment and study of this disease. And this is from Columbia Presbyterian, and the reason why you're seeing this is that their patient handouts and their physician handouts are publicized on the web. So they have rehab programs for people with long COVID. They give them breathing exercises. They have exercise programs that they can do at home. And this is just one of many, many slides showing different kinds of exercises that people can do. It's very, very well done, by the way. And they teach people how to monitor themselves. So this is an oximeter. And here is a rate of perceived exertion. You can see they use a scale from 1 to 10. So people can keep track of their progress. And why is that important? Well, it's important because they can take that information, subjective though it may be, and study it and see how successful their efforts are, what works, what doesn't work. So that's all very good. And it's a major center for study of viral illnesses. And then they have a whole mental health program to go along with it, very necessary. And these are the kind of instructions they give to people. All right, so we're almost at the end of the talk. Some of you may be very happy about that. Some of you might not be, but here's breaking news, folks. What day is today, the 25th? This is from August 17th, okay? I think that's just a week ago. A study which showed persistent hormone deficiency. So this virus gets into the brain, and what's in the brain? Your pituitary gland. Your pituitary gland is in charge of regulating many very, very important hormones in the body. And this diagram shows you all of the different hormones that are secreted. And it was suggested that, that these patients should be screened. And they did find that these patients had low levels of ACTH, which is a precursor for, not a precursor, hormone related to cortisol and testosterone for over a year. And of course, if you have low cortisol, low testosterone, that might affect your get up and go, as well as many, many, many other things. So that's brand new, ongoing, stay tuned. Now, there's a lot more going on for brain function. This is from July, by the way, okay? They use hyperbaric oxygen, that's oxygen under a lot of pressure for people who have foggy brains, right? And what they found was that this improves cerebral blood flow. And these charts show you the areas of the brains affected. And well, there's something called neuroplasticity in the brain. So what is neuroplasticity? It means that to a large extent, if part of the brain gets sick and can't function properly, other parts of the brain can take over, okay? Neuroplasticity. Plastic can be molded in different ways. So that's what they think is going on. And they found that these people did very well, very, very quickly. And here's another one. This little machine stimulates your vagus nerve that's in your neck. And look what they found. They found that stimulation decreased inflammatory markers in the body. So think about that. You're stimulating a nerve to decrease inflammation. That's pretty amazing stuff, right? But there were no improvement in respiratory symptoms. That's the other thing they looked at. And again, this is from April. But here's a portable device that people could use. It's not currently being used to my knowledge, but very simple thing to distribute among the patient population. And then finally, brain stimulation. They put a band over the head and put very low current electricity through the brain. And so in this particular case, they were able to measure visual fields in 2 patients. And so the dark part is where they could not see. The darker it is, the more difficult they had. And what they can show you is that once they got this treatment, they improved, and with time, they improved even more. These are very, very dramatic improvements, but as you can see, in this eye, there was still some very persistent damage from this disease. So this is a very nice visual showing of improvement with this particular therapy. Putting it all together, okay, great. So can we do that? I'm going to try. Long COVID is a silent epidemic affecting millions of people with significant impact on the workforce. Scientists were late in defining this entity, hampering research. Research needs to better define the syndromes, mechanisms, and treatment for the syndrome. The person with their microphone on who's having difficulty coughing or whatever, please shut it off. Polio, vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, it's reemerged from obscurity due to a flawed global vaccination effort. While polio is only found in a few countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, attenuated virus used in oral vaccines can mutate if the majority of the population is unvaccinated. For attenuated virus, then failure to maintain herd immunity is a self-defeating process and poses a real danger for the rest of the world. It is essential that people make sure they are fully immunized against this paralytic disease. And then monkeypox. Out of obscurity comes another illness rapidly spreading in heavily populated areas. It mainly affects persons participating in male-to-male sex. However, the rest of the community is not immune, with 5% reported cases occurring in heterosexuals. And as we have seen, and very significantly, children are now being affected by this disease. Now you may ask, why is that? Well, it's very likely that what we're seeing is a mutated virus, right? And so mutated virus becomes a problem for different parts of the population. The virus can be spread by casual contact with an infected person. And one question that has not been answered, I'd like to answer, is if one can contract this disease from an asymptomatic person, okay? That's not been answered to my satisfaction. So I'm wondering, is this our future? I say that half joking. And here is my card in case anybody is interested in seeing me as a patient or further information. And this is the Tree of Life. That's what I end all of my talks with. And we are open for discussion.
So, Martin, thank you so very much. That was really comprehensive and very frightening, I have to say. But let's open it up for questions. And so please remember that Dr. Schlesselberg cannot give you medical advice on a personal level because he's not your doctor. And so let's not ask, should I get another booster shot? We can't ask those kinds of questions. But please go ahead if somebody has a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Cantor Bob.
Hello, Martin. How are you doing? Question: does the severity of the disease experience influence the severity of long COVID or not having long COVID?
No, as I said, people who have very mild illnesses that go away can develop long COVID, sometimes quite a bit of time after the initial illness, and sometimes very severely. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't have high viral load or whatever. You know, symptoms are not caused by the virus. It's the body's reaction to the virus. So when someone gets COVID pneumonia, the virus already replicated, it's already there. It's the body's reaction to it, the cytokine storm, the filling up of everything with fluid. That's all done by your own immune system. And that's why for people who are hypoxic, who have low oxygen levels, we treat them with steroids. Now, here's something that I see. A lot of doctors are still giving Zithromax and steroids for people with mild COVID. Well, guess what? That is a bad thing to do because at that stage of the illness, the virus will replicate more and they put these people at risk for hospitalization. And of course, I get to see these people in the hospital. It is it's something that could easily be avoided. And for some reason, I don't see those doctors getting disciplined or lectured or anything. And yet it's very, very important to know the stages of the illness and the proper treatment for each. It's very different. You can hurt someone rather than help them if you give, for instance, heparin at the wrong time. Okay, another question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get rid of Cantor Bob that quickly, but sorry about that. There's a question in the chat from Justin. He said, we were once told by supposedly authoritative sources like the World Health Organization that COVID is primarily transmitted by droplets and wasn't airborne. We now know that the opposite is true. Why shouldn't we apply the precautionary principle and assume the same is true with monkeypox?
Well, you should never assume. I mean, so we're talking about, if you're talking about an issue of trust, you're on your own. I'm not going to comment on whether you should trust the authorities. You can decide for yourself. But just because something is true for one thing, logically, it doesn't mean it's true for something else. But if you're questioning what you're being told because in your own mind, you don't feel comfortable, I mean, that's a sign of an intelligent person, but I'm not going to tell you what to think.
Okay, and then we have Harvey is asking, how long does the polio vaccine last? Many haven't gotten a vaccine for 50 years.
So all I can tell you, Harvey, is that I haven't read that if you've been vaccinated in the past that you need to get re-vaccinated. I honestly don't know the answer other than telling you that I have not seen any recommendations to re-vaccinate. But if you're not sure you got your full course as a child, and I've had someone ask me this, I highly recommend you get vaccinated. It's an inactivated vaccine. It's been tried and true. And yeah, I wouldn't want to get polio. I wouldn't want to be that 1 in 100.
Are there other questions out there? Please feel free to unmute and ask the question or put it in the chat.
Well, good evening. First of all, really great slides. Appreciate all the effort and very up to date. And I guess one question I have is whether, because there's a lot of funding for COVID right now, that there is an over-identification of long COVID. I don't believe that, but I think a lot of people wonder if that's part of the precipitating issue. And then I haven't had COVID.
Stop. One question at a time. No comment.
Okay, sorry.
So the question was, because there's so much funding for COVID, is there an over-identification? I can tell you absolutely not. In fact, there's an under-identification. There are many people who have it, don't even realize it. Imagine you're a college athlete, you get sick, goes away, and then you go back to try to compete and you can no longer compete. That's no, it's not it is under-identified. And in fact, because it was so long for them to define it, it's not well researched. All the research I showed you are a few months old.
It's recent.
This is the ignored part of the population. And a lot of these people, and maybe, I don't know, do you folks know people with long COVID? I see them all the time. It's just what I do. They are very, very debilitated, and they're very nice people. I mean, they're people who are teachers, policemen, they work in prisons. I mean, they're very important people, and they can't do it. And they want to go back to work. And of course, when I see someone who wants to go back to work, that gives them a lot of credibility. It's like, Doc, I would want to get back to work. I'm doing everything I can. I work out every day, but I just don't have what I used to have. That's a sick person, okay? If I said to them, you should go back to work, then they'd be very happy. They love their work. They're dedicated. So no, it's under-identified. That has nothing to do with funding. I would say it's underfunded. It's ignored, and people are suffering because of that, because we need answers.
Okay, well, I agree with you. And the fear of long COVID is, I think, why a number of us have been overly, I mean, I have friends who they laugh at the fact that I haven't traveled, haven't done the things I would have done previously. But the reality is, I believe in long COVID, don't want to get it and haven't had it. So you did a really excellent risk factors, and I'm wondering, are you going to share those with us so that we can kind of use that as a matrix for making decisions in our own life? Because it's easy to become isolated and comfortable even. But what I'm hearing from you is this ain't going away. And I'd hate to be here in another 2 or 3 years not engaging more.
Well, before COVID, okay, let's go back in time.
Mm-hmm.
When you had to get somewhere and cross the street, what did you do? You did a risk assessment, right? What's the benefit? Getting to the other side of the street.
Yeah.
What are the risks? Getting run over by a car. So how did you avoid that? Well, you look both ways. You watch the signs. If you're really, really, really careful, you look both ways a whole bunch of times. And maybe you ran across it while there was no car. I mean, there are things you can do. So my way of thinking, which has not been the mainstream, is it's all risk benefit, all of it, from start to finish. When this disease was so fierce and people were ending up in the hospital, that's a different risk than what I'm seeing today, okay? Doesn't mean you can't get very, very sick and end up in the hospital. It's just, I don't see as many people. And benefit, well, when you do extreme things, it has effects. Now, we see many, many businesses are closed now, people out of work. These things had effect. Now, you may or may not be aware of it, or you may not see it, but it's all very real, everything that we do. And the thing is, if you really thought that by getting 2 Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, that all your problems would be over, then this virus is evolving, as are we. And so your thinking has to. So yeah, you know, I actually do all kinds of things, but I always look at that risk assessment chart. So if you remember early on, there were church choirs which were dying. Well, why? It's high risk all around. They weren't covering their mouths. They weren't spacing. Typically they congregate closely. They were indoors. You just turned into an owl. I like you better the other way, but okay, it's kind of
like me better. I'm
right.
sorry. I'll come back.
Someone turned into an owl. So
that's our logo.
So,
Sorry.
By the way, Melissa, we are recording this. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it over and over again and freeze frame anything that you want to hang on to. And I'm sure Dr. Schlesselberg will be happy to.
Well,
send
I
us
just
a
want
few
to
of
say
the slides.
thank you. It was a very good presentation.
I didn't finish.
Sobering.
I didn't finish.
I know you haven't,
because you distracted me with that owl. I felt from the very beginning that that risk benefit chart is what should have been taught to every single person. It never was, by the way. Most of you have never seen that before, except if you watch my lectures. To me, that's the most important chart in the whole lecture. If you look at that carefully, you can figure out activities that are safe. So my patient who went to New York thought she was being safe. This is a person who stayed indoor for 2 years, never went out except she had to, always wore a mask, always distance, everything. And she went into a Billy Joel concert. So reason why I put that chart up there was to show you that someone with the best intentions, and by the way, this is a very, very nice person. Really, you would like her. All of you would like her. Very, very nice. It's a tragedy. But when you went to the chart, if she had done that before going to this talk, she would never have done that. And boy, does she regret it. She's no longer a fan of Billy Joel. It's nothing to do with him, you know? But how many other people got sick from that concert? And people are going to concerts all the time. You don't think they're getting sick? People are sick all over the place. If you go into a public place and you keep your ear open, you will hear people coughing and sneezing. Now, not all of those have COVID, but many, many of them do. And yeah, there are people who have COVID and they don't change their activities. There's no, you know, they just go and do whatever they want to do. It takes all kind of people in this world. But what I encourage people who are listening to my talk is use your head. You're very smart. God gave you that. You don't need someone to tell you what to do. That's when you're a child or maybe too old to take care of yourself. You can figure out how to live with this thing and live a very good life. So people at the beach who are spread out, what's their risk on the list? Okay, so you go to the beach for the day, have a good day, your mental health comes back, then you come back to, oh yeah, the Inland Empire. But you know, there are strategies and it'd be very clear. So I'll give Rabbi a copy of it. She can distribute it to everybody because honestly, it wouldn't make me sad to see people doing that. And I'm ready if you had another question or if someone else has another question.
No, I'm okay. Can I come back to an owl now?
Yeah, you can be an owl. I'm going to.
Now I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the owl. Okay.
Someone said
Thank you,
owl pox
doctor.
is next. Okay, one more question is again from Harvey. Has any research shown the new boosters covering Omicron persist longer than previous vaccines?
I'm going to refer you to the great CDC website for any questions about vaccines. They're highly authoritative. They go in great detail. And I did give you the link at the beginning. If you want it again, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate your time. And I know you put a lot of effort and research into this presentation. So we really appreciate it. Melissa's laughing, I think. So thank you so much. And we will post this so you can let your friends know, you know, that this is available. I will send you all the link. And we really appreciate your dedication to informing our community about what's going on. And you're getting some thank yous in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
People are
you.
clapping and thanking you. So good night, everyone. Let's all stay safe.
Good night.
Thank you.